The bodies we inhabit are impossibly complex, and the world we inhabit is even more so. And with this complexity comes an inevitable variation that when compounded upon itself creates characteristic deviations from perceived neutrality. In other words, a style. A fighting style, a writing style, a fashion style, a style of speaking are all examples of it. And because of all these possibilities, when we make games with a simple goal, we have to make rule after rule to make it a semblance of a fun experience. When building a video game, however, every facet, every feature of the world has to be molded by the developer, and as such, the realm of possibilities doesn't need to be made smaller, but instead desperately expanded. And a common way developers do this is with classes. There are 3 types of games with classes: class character, class loadout, and class character loadout. To clarify, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is a class character game. You choose a character, which is a part of a class. A class loadout game would be Battlefront 2 or Rainbow Six Siege, where you choose a class and then decide the guns and stuff you want to choose afterwards. And finally, character class loadout would be a game like Risk of Rain 2, where you choose a character and then choose whatever variant of their abilities you want. Basically, in games, a character or a loadout is something that gives you or simply possesses a set of abilities. And a class is a group of characters and or loadouts that takes mental strain away from an aspect of accomplishing a goal, while increasing the strain in another aspect. To explain, if you're a heavyweight like Captain Falcon, you're slow, meaning if you want to hit an attack, you have to focus a lot on positioning and prediction. A move like the famous Falcon Punch, for example, requires you to see entire seconds into the future, potentially for devastating results. However, on the flip side, despite being slow, heavyweights are actually much harder to hit into the blast zone at mid-level percentages than characters that are quicker like Pichu, for example. The goal in Smash is to blast your opponent away, and the aspects of that goal I highlighted are as follows: positioning, the act of putting yourself in a location that increases the chance of you hurting your opponent while decreasing the chance of them hurting you; and attrition, the extent in which you can withstand the inevitable damage taken within a drawn-out battle. The mental strain of positioning on players using a heavyweight is high due to their slow attacks and movement, while the mental strain of handling a battle of attrition is much lower. Little hits here and there may damage a heavyweight, but unlike other characters, it'll never send them flying. Now that we know exactly what classes are, what exactly makes Silksong's classes so good? Well, as far as I can tell, it's because of subtleties and unreliance on stats. In Terraria, for example, there are 4 classes: Melee, Ranger, Mage, and Summoner, each hosting a wide range of weapons, from swords, claws, maces, guns, missile launchers, throwing knives, wands, tomes, and summons. Despite this variety, however, the actual gameplay spanning the classes is largely the same. In its latter stages, Terraria's melee weapons all become capable of range attacks, because in a bullet hell game, close-up weapons are wildly ineffective. So we fail to see stark differences between classes. All of them fly, all of them stay at a distance, and all of them spam the attack button without much aiming. Whips are a good example of this. From a gameplay standpoint, you'd expect them to be a melee weapon, but the way damage works in Terraria is that each weapon does a pretty pathetic amount of damage, and it's only through bigger and better increases in melee, range, magic, or summon damage through your armor and accessories that weapons actually begin dealing a reasonable amount of damage. Because of this, for the longest time, summoners were simply left flying away from attacks in Terraria because only summons could deal summon damage, not weapons. It was only in an update 9 years after the game's launch that the developers decided to add whips to buff summoners and to make their gameplay more engaging. As such, whips do summoning damage, even though thematically they make more sense as a melee weapon. There's not much difference between the classes' gameplay, so the different damage types, along with varying amounts of defense and average DPS between the classes, is required to supplement. So how does Silksong fix this all too common issue? It's by replacing stats with slots. In Silksong, there are 3 well-defined categories for what are called memories. There's offensive memories, which are just traps or thrown weapons with a limited usage that can be restored by resting at a save point. Defensive memories, which give silk, augment your healing ability, or save you from taking damage in some sort of way. And utility memories, which is a catch-all category for everything else. Different crests have different amounts of each type of slot, so you can think of each crest as having 3 stat values: an offense stat, a defense stat, and a utility stat, rather than having a "this class has more health but deals less damage," and "this class has less health but is quicker and deals critical hits" situation. You have a similar effect to the traditional stat system as having a memory that saves you from taking damage while healing, another that increases silk gain, and one that gives you silk upon taking damage will in fact keep you alive longer in a similar manner as having higher max health or defense would. But because each memory has its own programmed effect, the actual space for player expression is much higher. The second reason I think Silksong's classes are so good is Silksong's subtleties. Obviously, having a big world is nice, and having varied weapons helps with that a lot, but I found, in my opinion, at least the whole "this weapon deals high damage but is slow," while "this weapon deals low damage but is fast" to be quite boring in practice. However, small changes in weapons' behavior offering some variety has never been a point of contention for me. The True Knight's Edge and the True Excalibur are similar, and that's okay. It's a preference thing. And Silksong takes the inoffensiveness of small changes and goes crazy. Every class has a slightly different range and attack speed for its attacks. Even the acceleration curve on your sprint is changed ever so slightly. And ignoring the pogos and dash attacks, your movements are practically identical between classes. The only major change is the subtle shift in Hornet's relationship with the air. For example, the Reaper crest is the resident slow sweeping attacker of the roster, while the Hunter crest is the all-arounder. The dash attack for the Reaper looks like this, while the dash attack for the Hunter looks like this. Notice how whether or not the player hits an enemy completely changes Hornet's positioning for the Hunter while the Reaper stays consistent. This is a consistent theme with the Reaper, offering consistency and predictability at the expense of maneuverability and agility. A cool example of this difference was when I was exploring an area called Sinner's Road, and I was getting humbled by these roach enemies. The reason I was because I was using Reaper Crest, which increases the mental strain required to position yourself while greatly reducing the mental strain that comes with aerial combat. These roaches, unlike most intelligent foes in the game, were wild and erratic, so I found it hard to predict their movements. As such, I switched to the Explorer Crest, which allows Hornet to zip around with short-range attacks, taking the strain off positioning beforehand, requiring good in-the-moment spacing. It's a very reactionary crest, and after switching to that crest, fighting the beast honestly was easy. So that's classes in games. By changing simple values like range or speed, the developers can create classes that fit the playstyles of different players. And while adding complex logic and entirely new movesets to different classes may seem like the best option for making them more memorable, there's something to be learned from how elegant Silksong manages to be. For those who don't know, Silksong has a lot of parkour, and because of this, each class's pogo has to move Hornet in a similar way. And they do. You can't cheese any parkour segments by switching your crest, so it's not Hornet's relationship with the air that's exactly changing, but more accurately her tempo in the air that's changing. Silksong doesn't have mana or special moves, and yet each class feels extremely characteristic. What also impresses me is the different amounts of specific slot types being a replacement for traditional stats. A class can be more defensive, sure, but you still get to choose in what way. And forgive me if I simply haven't played enough games, but while I have seen this system before, I've never seen it as a replacement for traditional stat changes altogether. So that's my theory on how classes in games work. I always like a class system, and honestly, even if it's like mostly superficial like the stuff we see in Terraria, I think it enhances the experience a lot in my opinion. But Silksong opened my eyes to what's possible, and that's why classism is a good thing.